Ntokozo Khumalo out in Kimberley following those developments as community members gather to watch that operation unfold. Now, as recovery efforts for those 5 trapped miners at Ekapa Mine get underway, let's take a look at the legal implications of all this, especially the company that has applied for liquidation. In studio, I'm joined by Director of Extractive Industry Law in Africa at the University of Pretoria. That's Dr. Tiisetso Rantlo, as well as Tokyo Ndlela, a managing partner at Tokyo Ndlela Attorneys. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. I'll start with you, Dr. Rantlo. Let's talk about, the kind of mining activities that a mine would have to be involved in to be susceptible to these mud rushes.
Thank you so much, Linda, and good morning to your viewers. There's quite a lot of activities that would be happening, and in this kind of incidents, it's a little bit difficult to know what actually transpired, because what usually happens is when there are incidents that happen, there are investigations that have to be done. So if, for instance, let's say there's a risk that then gets reported, the investigations will be done before, and then the reports will be done, and then we'll try to see how then we put measures in place to make sure that that incident is taken care of. But in this kind of incident that has happened, we are at the place where we do not know what happened. It's only now that the investigations are going to be done, and we're going to know what actually transpired, what triggered this incident.
This, of course, raises questions around, safety in the mines. And we know that the Mine Health and Safety Act really does stipulate what needs to happen in terms of safety and following processes. Talk to us about, these questions that are now being raised about whether or not the place was even safe.
Again, Linda, it's at this point in time, it's a bit difficult to, answer those questions because the investigations haven't been done. As I said, if there was a risk that was reported before, then investigations would have been done, and then we would then have a report that says, hey, this is what is likely to happen, and make sure that we do this in order to make sure that no incidents happen or this does not get out of hand. But in the incident where there was just floods, there was just sludge that came into the mine, and rocks fell in, we are not sure what actually transpired. We are not sure whether there were precautionary measures that were taken, but looking at what happened, the assumption would be no, but we'll only have to wait for the reports that are going to be done afterwards, the investigations that will be done.
Yeah, but what obligations, legal obligations, does the mine have in terms of health and safety?
In terms of the Mine Health Safety Act, one of the objectives is to ensure that the mines ensure the health and safety of the employees. It's an obligation. So they have to make sure that they ensure the health and safety of the employees. They have to make sure that they appoint employees as well that are going to be making sure that the mine is safe. They're going to be, making sure that there are processes also that are, and then they have to also, create a code of conduct, which will also then, at the end of the day, sort of set out how, if ever there are incidents, how are those incidents are going to be handled.
Yeah, let me come to you, Tokyo. We know that the mine now has applied for liquidation, and of course, it triggers a lot of fears around job losses. But talk to us about whether or not, I know Dr. Rantlo has just told us that the circumstances are unknown, really, so it's very difficult to map out what exactly could have possibly led to the company even filing for liquidation. But talk to us about the processes of liquidation. At this particular point, a tragedy happens, and shortly after that, we have the company say, you know what, it means we can't at this point meet our financial obligations.
Linda, thank you for having me, and greetings to your viewers. With regard to liquidation, that's governed by the Companies Act. And normally when liquidation takes place, in this case it's a voluntary liquidation, it basically speaks to whether the company is generating enough revenue in order to pay off certain debts, or whether the company is no longer can no longer operate at its capacity that's meant to operate at. And then that would lead to the company then voluntarily registering for liquidation. And what that does basically is that everything's put on hold. There's an appointed liquidator that's put in place either by the company or by the courts, depending on the circumstances. And then that appointed liquidator would then begin to sell all the company assets. But what would happen in this case is that the employees would then be placed as, or recorded as a registered or a preference creditor in this particular case. And so that means once the assets have been sold and there's now revenue to be released to creditors, the employees are treated as somewhat of a first priority along with other preferent creditors.
And we're hearing in this particular instance, Tokyo, that employees were not really paid their monies. It leaves many of them in limbo, right? So at this particular point, what does this process mean? Could it take months for them to even get paid?
That depends on the process, because what happens with the liquidation is that once the assets have been identified, then an auctioneer is appointed. And so therefore all these assets are then auctioned off, and that's a process in and of itself. So in terms of the time frame, it's very difficult to ascertain what the exact time frame would be in this particular circumstance.
And I mean, in this kind of situation, what is the legal recourse for an employee who still has to feed their family?
I understand it's quite a tricky situation, but there is a regulated process in place, and the employee will have to follow through with that process.
Yeah. Let me come to you, Dr. Rantlo, because, I mean, we're talking about unknown circumstances, and our reporter, Ndogozo Kumalo, was telling us that really communication has really been bad coming from the mine. But when we look at, the status of the mine right now, yes, they're applying for liquidation. Does this mean that they would also be following regulations around the closure of the mine, or at this particular point, it remains an operational mine?
No. Because they have filed for liquidation, then that means they have to cease the operations. But also given the incident that happened, they cannot continue to operate. So then what happens is if they decide, there is instance where DMRE can then decide, there are certain circumstances. If they have applied for liquidation, the mining right would then, lapse. And then that's when now the whole process of rehabilitation then kickstart. But there are other certain factors that needs to be considered. Would there be somebody who would be willing to take over the mine, and then the mining operations continues, or then it will just cease? And if it ceases, then that's when the whole rehabilitation process will kickstart. But one thing I think that is important to highlight is that whatever happens right now, its environmental obligations are not going to cease. So the mine has to still continue to, observe its environmental obligations.
Yeah, and issues of, the closure certificates, I mean, does it come in now or even at a later stage?
It'll come at a later stage. It'll come at a later stage because there are certain processes that have to happen. Again, there will have to be rehabilitation. DMRE will have to then make sure that it is satisfied that the mine has undertaken all its obligations pertaining to rehabilitation, and they're satisfied that there's nothing more that needs to be done. Yeah. Which, unfortunately, as it stands now, it's that getting a closure certificate. Tokyo will agree with me. It's one of those challenging things that we have currently in the country. It's not just, given out willy-nilly.
What makes it difficult, Tokyo?
I think what makes it difficult is that there's a lot of procedures involved, and then those procedures, at times there might be backlogs from other companies who have also applied for their sort of closure certificates as well. And so because of that backlog, it then causes administrative issues that take place as well. So there's various factors that could lead to that sort of prolonged activity when it comes to obtaining that sort of certificate.
Yeah, gentlemen, I wish we had so much time to, go through all of these legal processes and the legal frameworks that govern what we're seeing playing out in Kimberley. That was the Director of Extractive Industry Law in Africa at the University of Pretoria, Dr. Tiisetso Rantlo, as well as Tokyo Ndlela, a managing partner at Tokyo Ndlela Attorneys, talking to us really about that important story coming out of Kimberley.